There is a United States agency that annually spends around $300 million on democracy in the continent of Africa. While this may sound like a righteous goal to some, when you dig under the surface, you find out that the outcomes are often destabilization for the benefit of Western interests. So in this video, I'm going to explain what this agency is and exactly how it functions as a deception, claiming something good while it in fact has huge negative impact on the continent of Africa. Thank you so much for choosing to watch this video today. If you don't know me, my name is TJ. I'm Nigerian and British mixed. And on this channel, we talk about African geopolitics. In a recent video on my channel, I showed how the United States used an agency called the National Endowment for Democracy to completely overthrow Nepal's government in just 1 year. As I researched the topic, I realized that I had only scratched the surface. That perfectly executed regime change in Nepal wasn't a one-off. It was part of a massive global operation, and Africa is directly in their crosshairs. So when it comes to the National Endowment of Democracy Agency, even the name is a masterpiece of deception. Democracy, the very word that should represent the will of the people, has been weaponized to destroy that will. This is an organization that spends hundreds of millions of dollars annually to undermine the democratic process of sovereign nations around the world. In 2024 alone, $286 million for over 1,900 projects across more than 90 countries. And as I dug deeper into their operations, I discovered that Africa has become the primary testing ground for what they call democracy promotion. But what it actually looks like is systematic destabilization. So let's talk about what the National Endowment of Democracy, or the NED, really is, because understanding their true nature is critical. So the NED was created in 1983 under Ronald Reagan. Its own founder, Alan Weinstein, admitted in a 1991 Washington Post interview that a lot of what we do was done covertly 25 years ago by the CIA. What he's saying essentially is that the NED exists to do openly what the CIA used to do in secret. When the CIA's covert operations were exposed in the 60s and 70s, embarrassing the American government globally, they needed a new approach. So they created the NED, a so-called private foundation that would carry out the same regime change operations, but with the appearance of legitimacy. Carl Gershman, one of the NED's longest-serving presidents, explained why this mattered. He said that it would be terrible for democratic groups around the world to be seen to be subsidized by the CIA, because that's exactly what had been happening, and it was creating scandals. So instead of ending these operations, they just rebranded them. The NED became what critics now call the CIA's soft power arm, a white glove operation that makes interference look like humanitarian work. This rebranding was genius in its cynicism. Instead of CIA agents sneaking around in the shadows, you now have smiley Americans with clipboards talking about civil society and democratic values while they're handing out millions of dollars to opposition groups around the world. It's the same destabilization, the same interference, the same regime change agenda, but now it comes wrapped in the language of human rights and democracy promotion. Here's what that democracy support actually looks like on the ground in Africa. The NED is currently operating in 19 African countries with programs that they claim focus on political inclusion, defending civil space, combating corruption, and promoting credible independent media. When you examine where this money goes and what these projects actually do, a disturbing pattern emerges. They consistently fund opposition groups, media outlets, and civil society organizations that just so happen to align with American geopolitical interests. The most revealing example of this strategy is playing out right now in the Sahel region. By now, I'm sure you know what's happened with Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. These are popular coups that removed Western puppet governments, kicked out the French, and formed the alliance of the Sahel states in a genius act of decolonization. And how did the NAD respond? Not by respecting the sovereignty and popular will of these African nations. Instead, it immediately began what they call supporting civil society to press for elections and return to civilian rule. Translation: They're funding opposition groups to destabilize these new governments and restore Western-friendly regimes. They're working to counter what they call autocratic narratives, which means undermining any media or voices that support these popular governments. They're promoting human rights, which in the NAD language means supporting groups that will criticize these governments for not being sufficiently aligned with Western interests. So let me give you some numbers that reveal the true scale of their operation. That almost 300 million in annual NAD funding could completely eliminate the entire IMF debt of Lesotho, for example, which as of right now owes around 11.7 million. And you could still have 288 million left over. In fact, the 300 million could wipe out the combined IMF debt of Lesotho, Eswatini, Comoros, Sao Tome, Principe, Djibouti, Guinea-Bissau, Equatorial Guinea, and Cape Verde combined. While America spends 300 million annually to destabilize the continent of Africa, African nations collectively paid 1.4 trillion in 2024 just to serve their foreign debt. Much of it owed to the Western-aligned institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. So do you see what's happening? The 300 million isn't just spending, it's an investment. It's an investment in keeping African policy unstable, economically dependent, and consistently paying debt service to the very system that controls Africa. So for every dollar that America invests in undermining African sovereignty through the NAD, Africa pays nearly $5,000 back to Western creditors. This is the business of modern colonialism. Spend a mere 300 million to destabilize governments that might resist a debt system that collects 1.4 trillion annually, all while calling it democracy promotion, as well as claiming they're helping African people. The NAD's playbook is everywhere. When a government pursues policies that serve its people rather than Western corporations, suddenly there's an urgent need for democracy promotion in that country. When African leaders demand fair prices for their resources or seek alternative partnerships, suddenly the NAD discovers some civil society needs funding to promote democratic values. Just look at their operations across the continent. In Angola, they're funding organizations to counter government measures because Angola isn't sufficiently pro-Western. In Kenya, they've established a regional hub coordinating influence campaigns across East Africa. In Tanzania, Burundi, Cameroon, and Rwanda, they're running programs in what they openly call authoritarian countries, meaning countries that don't automatically submit to Western demands. The pattern is predictable. Identify a government not aligned with American interests, fund opposition groups and media that criticize them, amplify every failure until they appear illegitimate, and then local forces can do the dirty work. Or in the case of Nepal, the young people can rise up and have a revolution to do the dirty work. You see, they're in the business of building networks for future battles, creating media outlets, training opposition leaders, establishing civil society groups ready to be mobilized when needed. The sad part is that the human cost is staggering, and even more damaging is how they positioned civil society itself. Legitimate African organizations now face suspension because so many groups have been compromised by foreign funding. People can't tell the difference between authentic activism and manufactured opposition. This is why the Sahel governments were right to be suspicious of Western-funded civil society. When your former colonial master funds groups opposing your independence policies, that's not democracy promotion. That's modern colonialism. The genius of the NAD's approach is plausible deniability. They don't fund coup plotters directly, but they create the information environment that makes the coup seem necessary. When governments fall, somehow the new leaders share remarkably similar views about Western interests. Some countries recognize this threat openly. Russia banned the NAD in 2015. China has sanctioned NAD officials, and even critics within the United States have questioned these operations. But African countries have been slower to respond. Many African leaders still see the NAD funding as legitimate civil society support, not understanding it comes with specific and covert political objectives. So the solution for us starts with awareness. Most people across Africa have never heard of the National Endowment for Democracy. They don't know how these manipulation tactics work, and that's exactly how the NAD wants it to stay. Their power depends on operating in the shadows, disguised as legitimate support. That's why knowledge of this is the first line of defense. When we understand these tools used against us, that understanding is the beginning of resistance. We can teach others what to look for. Opposition groups with unlimited funding, media outlets promoting Western-friendly narratives, connections between foreign money and local movements. Knowledge spreads, and an informed population becomes impossible to manipulate. The NED's hundreds of millions represents one of the most serious threats to African sovereignty in the modern era. The systematic erosion of political independence through manufactured consent and purchased opposition. But armed with knowledge, we can resist. Had you heard of the NED, and did you know the extent to which they meddle in African affairs? Let me know in the comments. But if you have nothing to say, would it be too much for me to ask you to write the words "no outside meddling" in the comments section? It just lets me know that you watched the video to the end, you like what I do, you like the channel, and you want me to continue. Thank you so much for watching today, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.